Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for tuning in for another episode. Had a pretty cool little thing today happen while we were driving into town. I was with the whole family, and there's one little stretch of road where I can see the backwaters of the Wisconsin River. And then on the other side, there's a couple of private ponds that were actually dug to form the road that we were driving on. And it was pretty cool because on my left, I could see guys that just got out ice fishing. Literally, the river froze up yesterday. And these backwaters are big backwater sections, but there were already a handful of ice fishermen that were out. Only a couple inches of ice, so I'm not sure I'd be out there, but there were guys out. But then on the other side, you had these clear water ponds that were still wide open. I mean, it didn't even have ice on the edges yet, so I knew the water temp for those is still significantly warmer than what I was seeing on the backwaters. And I kind of pointed it out to Sarah and the boys, and Sarah's like, "Why would that be? Like, wouldn't that small pond freeze up before a big backwater of the Wisconsin River?" And the reality is it has to do with, more than anything, the watercolor. The river water is much darker, much more stained, has a lot of sediment that's flowing through it, and these little private ponds are really clear, ponds. And when I say ponds, I'm talking maybe a half acre in size, not big. They cannot be more than, 10 foot of water. I mean, so they might be relatively deep, but the backwaters have 10 foot of water in them too. And it was just a really cool example where I could kind of point out to the family where yesterday everything was wide open. And today you've got backwaters that are frozen and these ponds that are still wide open. And, when I explained to Sarah, I'm like, a lot of it just has to do with watercolor. The clear water ponds freeze slower than the shallower, dirtier water because you're going to have more sediment that's going to just cool off faster. The high today is only about 20 degrees, so that ice is building where you still have to cool off that cold, clear water that doesn't have any sediment in it. It's not really that much deeper, but it's going to take significantly longer to get that to freeze. And, it's just a good reminder. I'm using this story to kind of point you in the direction of no matter where you're at in the country, if you've got clear water or cold or a dirty water during cold water periods, there's a right time and place to fish the dirty water, and there's a right time and place to fish the cold, clear water.
Today's video is brought to you by the Deep Dive app. This has had an amazing new update. As you guys know, I love the water clarity feature. As you can see right here, we're looking at Grand Lake, which just had a whole pile of rain come into it. It went from being really clear to having a lot of dirty water coming in the bottom end of it. Just an amazing feature to be able to determine where the clear water is versus the muddy water. However, they just introduced the wind effects. Now, the wind effects is really cool because we've had wind effects as part of the app in the past, but all it did is show where the wind was hitting the shoreline the most, as you can see from the dots, the orange and bright red dots, which indicate where the wind is really striking. But now the wind feature also indicates what the wave action is like on the lake itself. So some of the features you're going to get from this is determining where to get from place to place safely by avoiding the heavy, rough water conditions. You'll be able to determine where you may have some of the strongest current flow and some of the places where you can fish to stay protected. Now, along with that, you still have some of my favorite features like the patterns that you've got on the lake that indicate the best baits and lures to fish with. You've also got the water inflow app, which shows you where a bunch of the rain input comes in. That can be an amazing pattern to fish throughout the year. Just a great feature to have. So many positive features anytime you're fishing or using the Deep Dive app. Just points you in the right direction to catch more fish. Whether you're a tournament angler or a local fun fisherman that's just out to catch a few fish, the Deep Dive app will help you catch more fish next time you're out on the water.
For me specifically, if I have my choice, I would much rather fish clear water when it's cold out. I feel like those conditions are much more stable. You don't have nearly as much fluctuation in water temperature. When you have that darker water that's got a lot of sediment, that sediment will grab a lot of that coolness and just really help cool that water down much faster. It also, on the other side, will warm up much faster though too. So that's a big part of what I want to talk about. So if I'm got my choice and I'm going to be fishing a day where I've got overcast conditions, I am 100% going to try to fish clear water. Generally speaking, your clear water conditions are going to be better in your cold water periods because, like I said, there's less water temperature fluctuation, and the fish still tend to feed better during that time. They've got a bigger strike zone, so you can get them to move further to eat your bait. That's why baits like your jerk baits, your swim baits, can be much better in clear water versus dirtier water. You've got a much smaller strike zone, which means you've got a narrower casting window to get that fish to actually generate into biting. Now, I will say there's probably some of you guys out there that are like, well, what we're finding with forward facing sonars, you can still get those fish to bite. That is very much true. I'm not saying you can't get those fish to bite. The difference is if you're not using forward facing sonar, you don't know where that fish is. So you need to be able to draw that fish from further away on your cast. So if you've got clear water, you can get that fish maybe to come 10 or 15 feet to bite your bait. Versus in dirty, cold water, that bite window may only be 2 feet. And if you've got forward facing sonar, you can make repetitious casts at that fish to finally get that fish to hone in on your bait. So if you're out fishing in clear water versus dirty water, your strike window is just bigger in clear water. You can entice fish to come from further distances. Now, having said that, if I know I've got a good, sunny, warm day, those are going to be some of your best fall days to fish. And it's almost always going to be better in the late afternoon on parts of the lake that are a little dirtier or just dirtier water areas because you're going to have more warm up. And the reality is, a few degree warm up for a cold blooded fish is a big temperature change. And you really can generate, or you can run into fish that are going into more of a feeding mode because the water temperatures have risen. You'll also find that you have more fish that are up shallow because that shallow water warms faster and they're just easier to identify a lot of times. And in some instances, they'll be up in a foot and a half, 2 foot water because you could have water temperatures that are 10 degrees warmer in really shallow water versus, say, main lake areas or main river areas. So, from that standpoint, you can pick and choose on these cold water days, if you want to fish dirty water or clear water. But if I'm going to fish dirty water, I almost always want to do it in the second half of the day from lunchtime on. It just seems like those bodies of water tend to be much better in the afternoon versus in the early morning. Whereas on a clear water, I can usually generate more strikes from fish right off the bat in the morning. Those fish aren't expecting to have really wild temperature changes and they just seem to be a little bit more consistent. And when you're talking about bait choices, again, it goes back to that strike window. If you're fishing dirty water, I generally like baits that are much slower moving, that produce some movement or some vibration to allow the fish to hone in on it, and bigger, bulkier baits that again help those fish find your bait. So I'm talking big single bladed Colorado blade spinner baits, maybe a big bladed vibrating jig. Your jigs are going to be good. Things like that tend to be, in my opinion, better on your dirty water fisheries. But if I was fishing cold, clear water, those aren't going to be the baits I'd be choosing. I'd be choosing jerk baits, swim baits, blade baits, drop shots, things like that, or even a finesse jig, just smaller profiled baits that are not necessarily about creating vibration in the water, but are more about just kind of creating a good easy meal for a fish that's maybe a little bit more lethargic because the water temperatures are cold. But it is really interesting to see how much your water temperatures can vary just based on the clarity of the water. So you want to recognize before you're heading out that, whether you're talking fall periods where generally water temperatures are falling as a whole, or you're talking about early spring periods where as a whole maybe your water temperatures are slowly starting to rise. Uh, but you want to recognize that there are definitely better days for your dirty water fisheries and days that are not as good as a whole for the same dirty water fisheries. And overall, your clear water fisheries are going to be much more stable and much more consistent for that time of year. Anyways, guys, I just wanted to share it. I thought it was interesting because, as soon as I kind of started talking about it with Sarah, she just didn't it was surprising to her, and the boys in the back were just, it was kind of mind-blowing to them that people were out fishing on this side of the road and on this side of the road where you've got a much smaller mass of water. it still was wide open to, there was not even ice forming on the shorelines yet. Uh, Still kind of sad, not looking forward to not being able to get out much, but just kind of a cool thing that goes on in nature. So thought I'd share it with you guys. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Stay tuned. We'll have a new video coming out tomorrow for you.